when he pops out of the fire at the end, I remember as a kid that being like crazy. Like I was like, oh, they
So
defeated him. He
cliche.
blew up in a truck.
So cliche.
Well, not back then.
Let them fight.
Welcome to Film Fights, where we don't just talk about movies, we make them fight. That's a work in progress. We're gonna change it. Today we're here for an episode of our first officially branded episode of Classic Clash, where we, as I wrote here, take two films with a comparable quality and make them battle it out for cinema supremacy. Today we're talking about Robocop versus Terminator. We have the Film Fights triumvirate here today. We got Tay and cousin Kyle, our unofficial third podcast host. So to run through our criteria, we basically have 5 categories that we're going to be focusing on. The first one is story, which is plot structure, beginning, middle, and end. We have characters, which there's plenty of. We have the aesthetics, the settings, visuals, and musics. We have action, which is pretty crucial for action movies. And lastly, we have themes. We're also going to be ranking these movies in each category with a 10-point system. So once we kind of are wrapped up our thoughts on each category, we're going to write down a score between 0 and 10 for each category, meaning a total of 40 points for each of us. And then we're going to combine all of our points at the end to see which one we liked the best overall. And without any further ado, let's get started. Robocop 1987 is directed by Paul Verhoeven and written by Edward Neumeier and Michael Myers. My Halloween instincts are taking over there. It is set in a crime-ridden Detroit where police officer Alex Murphy, played by Peter Weller, is brutally attacked and left for dead. OCP, a powerful corporation, transforms him into a cyborg law enforcement officer known as Robocop. As he navigates his new existence, Robocop uncovers corruption within the police force and battles against crime, while also grappling with the remnants of his human memories. The film explores themes of identity, justice, and corporate influence in a dystopian future. The Terminator 1984 is written and directed by legendary filmmaker James Cameron and co-written by Gail Ann Hurd and William Wisher. It stars Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, a cyborg assassin sent from a post-apocalyptic future to the 1980s with a mission to kill Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, who is the mother of the future resistance leader John Connor. Kyle Reese, played by Michael Bean, is a soldier from the future sent back to protect Sarah. This unlikely pair is forced to work together not only to survive the unstoppable and oppressive Terminator that's tracking them down, but the impending doom of a dark tomorrow. I think what Robocop does exceptionally well is being an action-packed, campy, but also somewhat serious story that follows Alex Murphy dying and then regaining his humanity. That is the core of the story. And everything, the aesthetics, the action, this is all the characters. They're all in service of helping Alex Murphy get to that point.
I think what I like about it is that it shows through a lot of the commercials, which the fact that it's satirical, so you can laugh at it because it's funny, but it's also funny because it's true. When I talked to my parents, they were like, oh, I mean, this is exactly like how it was back in our time. Just how a lot of those commercials, even though they were silly, they would fit right in. So
like Nukem and
yeah. I want to play that. Buy that for $1. We had to say it.
I'd buy that for $1.
I've been saying it all week.
Yeah, I think that sort of idea is carried well throughout the movie. I mean, the action scenes are serious moments because it's usually a matter of life or death, one way or the other. But there's also funny stuff happening. The guy gets shot in the crotch, like, it's funny. It's funny, but it's not like taking you out of the experience like, oh, that could never happen necessarily. It's still like in service of itself.
RoboCop's tonal balance is pretty close to perfect.
That too. I especially rewatching it, I was focusing on that a lot, and it balances the tone super well. It's not going like right from a serious dire moment right into one of the silly commercials usually. That's typically like put in a moment where maybe you're getting some development, but it's not like a matter of life or death right before and after.
As you said, like it doesn't like put its jokes at expense of the story. That's something that I've been harping on new movies a lot, where they're like, well, if it's not funny, people people won't pay attention, and so they add in humor in places where humor isn't really necessary, and it comes at the expense of the story. That is not so with RoboCop or Terminator for that matter. But the difference is RoboCop, I would say, is a lot more fun in how it presents their ideas while also still being able to have a story that works really well. Like as Kyle said, the commercials, they fit in just fine without feeling like the story is like, now you've ruined the tone or the pace of the story. And it's like there's lots of scenes where like that are truly beautiful, like when RoboCop, they cut open his mask so you can see a little bit more of his facial expression as he watches all of his fellow cops shoot him down outside of the OCP building. How much damage he takes, him just trying to survive. It's like it's really
sort of like Frankenstein against the mob of people with torches.
Exactly. It was such a powerful moment. But then there's other moments where RoboCop is just throwing people through glass windows left and right, and it's entertaining. It's fun to watch, but it's not like I'm like, oh, stop making jokes. It's kind of like, in a weird way, like a really violent slapstick humor. It's kind of, but it works really well. It doesn't conflict with the tone of the movie, and I think that the tonal balancing of RoboCop just nails it. Immaculate. It's next level. But while we're talking about tonal balancing in RoboCop, we should just real quickly hop over to Terminator. I also think that the tone is perfect throughout that movie. It doesn't have to balance as much though, because it's not trying to mix humor and like seriousness as much. Terminator is more just trying to be serious.
And his Terminator isn't really too much of a satire of anything, I don't think. In comparison.
They're both kind of action movies based off like a sort of robotic person.
Yeah.
But then, RoboCop is that person as the protagonist, Terminator is that person as the villain, and then RoboCop is more of the satire, has that element, and then Terminator has more of the slasher element.
Yes.
Yeah,
and so Terminator takes itself a lot more seriously. There are some jokes in the movie, like Terminator having a list of responses to reply to, or like when he's walking down the hall with his big gun, and then that guy's like they have a lot of funny moments in the Terminator, but it's not nearly at the level of like a RoboCop where you see Ed 209 malfunctioning and it's hilarious of just getting brutally like shot down, like just how perfectly wrong.
So unnecessary.
It's overall just a more serious tone, but it sticks to that tone perfectly. It doesn't, there's not like moments in it where I'm like, oh, that's distracting. Like, but you could almost argue that it's more impressive that RoboCop is able to balance what it balances, because when you're trying to balance humor and tension, it can be very difficult.
Yeah,
and so
especially when you only have so much time.
Yeah, and
when you move as fast as the movie does. But
exactly, and doing that all in like an hour and 40-minute runtime is really impressive. But Terminator's tone feels a little bit more believable in a lot of ways, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
In Terminator?
Yeah, I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing, but because Terminator takes itself more seriously,
it had an easier time handling its tone well.
Yeah, and so, but I think it does that well. Where RoboCop, you have like these funny little commercials that are interesting satire. It does make the tone like a little bit more comic booky, but I mean, comic books are good. It's a different vibe. I'm saying with Terminator, I fully buy into the story a little bit better because of the very consistent tone. I believe very much that Kyle Reese would be this kind of no-nonsense, awkward guy with no social skills that would fall in love with a picture, pretty much, because that's how bleak his future was. I buy into Sarah Connor being just initially very startled by everything, initially not wanting that responsibility, that when she was like, man, I'm probably disappointing to you, Kyle, and not you, but Kyle Reese, and he's like, not at all. You were super strong. She's like, no, I'm not. But by the time you get to the end of the movie, you kind of see the beginning seeds of what she might become. in the future being that person that ends up raising a John Connor. They lay the groundwork for that subtle character arc really well. It's not as in your face as RoboCop, which isn't super in your face. It's not like bad. It's a very subtle metamorphosis that Sarah Connor goes on that feels very realistic. At the same time, while Kyle Reese is from this future comprised of robots, you see the humanity kind of slowly coming out of him by the time he gets to the end of the movie, where he is more tender with her and he is more like loving with her, and he ends up being the father of John Connor, which is just ties the movie together in so many ways too, which I think full circle brings it all back. Him basically making Sarah Connor into the mother that she needs to be for John Connor. Well, is she kind of turned him into just more of a human father character. And their relationship isn't like a typical romance per se, but I think how Terminator handles it handles it so well.
There's never going to be an easy way to explain time travel, and essentially what happened with Terminator at the end the way it did.
Yeah.
There's never going to be a good explanation for that, and I don't really expect that from movies nowadays. All I can say is that I think I like what they went with, and it was still directed well. I do still think of it as a little bit contrived, what they went with.
Oh, I agree with you.
Like, especially how you explained it and then seeing it and thinking about it, I think they still pulled it off mostly. Just not what I prefer generally. I think there were maybe better ways to do it still.
And yeah, as when I finished the movie with the fob, he was like, "That was so dumb."
I'll come around on it a bit from then.
I can see that initially.
At first, I was like, yeah, it was basically.
Whenever it's time travel, it's always going to be a little dumb.
Yeah.
Obviously, everything in the movie should have changed after they time traveled.
Well, and I think,
and it's like, is it a loop? Does this happen for the rest of the time? Kyle Reese keeps coming back.
Get into sequels and
well,
blah, 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 blah.
And this isn't, and like I said, this isn't the Terminator film theory episodes, but like I think that it's really fun to talk to people about the ending of Terminator 1, because like there's different interpretations for how the time theory works, and they don't immediately spell it out for you, and I think that works. I think it works better the less you explain a lot of times, because when you have these movies that are like, yeah, which has happened in like every time travel movie, every multiverse movie, they're like, it's not how it is in the movies. This is how it really is. And I'm like, stop trying to explain it and act like every other movie was
I hate
dumb.
that.
That is my
least
horrible.
trope.
They did that in The Flash.
So
they did that in
awful.
Endgame.
Endgame has the worst about it.
Yeah.
Because they don't explain it at all, and it's even stupider than Back to the Future.
I know.
It's so horrible.
I look at like more of like two general theories of time, and that's more like the butterfly effect, Back to the Future timeline, and then you have a fixed timeline theory where it's like there is not a universe that exists where Sarah Connor doesn't meet Kyle Reese and create a child. Like that's just always how it went. That's how it went every single time. And so the future keeps moving forward, but it only moves forward because it was ensured by them going to the past. There's no branching timeline. There's one timeline. Based off only watching the first Terminator movie, that's what my
only problem is that it's a little dumb, because it's like, how does it happen in the first place? Because there is no Kyle Reese. For the very first time the timeline goes through, there is no Kyle Reese, right? Like,
well, it's kind of like how you look at
the thing with those is, or the thing with that interpretation is always, how could it have possibly even started?
Exactly. Yeah, it can't start because...
But I'm saying the first time it always, that's kind of the paradox, is if you look at time as something that moves infinitely forward and backwards, that the time is set.
True. I mean, if that's how you look at
that's
the,
what I'm, that's how the fixed timeline works.
That's how you look.
Yeah.
That's how you have to look at it for the Terminator.
Yeah, and that's how I would look at it for the Terminator theory of time. And in a vacuum, I can sort of make it make sense for that. Now, other movies, I think, conflict with that a lot later in the franchise, but
this is about Terminator 1.
But Terminator 1, that's kind of how I look at it. It's how I like to look at it. Let's real quick, I want to talk about Bob Morton.
That's also something I love about Robocop, is Bob Morton, would you call him like a good character? Because
he made a product that worked.
He made a product that worked, and he put Robocop in the world, who is out doing good.
You might be like, who's Bob Morton? He's basically an up-and-coming board member of OCP that's kind of trying to...
He's trying to take the position of vice president.
Yeah, vice president, and he's competing with Dick Jones, who's basically the main corporate douchebag who made Ed 209s, which are like these big mechs, but they don't work that great. And he's the guy the younger guy that's promoting the Robocop program, so to speak.
I actually love Bob's character. It's really hard not to love his character. But I think it's I think it's pretty realistic to where even if you're technically doing good things, a lot of the time people will be doing good things for their own selfish reasons.
Yes. And also, like, you can argue that they have a lot of flaws and are maybe even bad people otherwise.
Like, if there was...
I just love that. I love that in stories. It's sort of empty and gone now. Like, where you have characters who... It's a struggle because they are necessary for the good events to happen, but they're morally reprehensible.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I was weirdly rooting for him. Like, when
I was kind of rooting for him, too.
He's trying to climb the corporate ladder, and I'm like, I want you to, Bob. I want you to rise up.
I want you to beat out Dick Jones.
Yeah,
so it's like, well,
the other option.
Bob.
Yeah, it's like a presidential race. You feel like your candidates aren't maybe the greatest, but you have to choose one of them. Big fan of Bob Morton for whatever reason. So I just had to give my main man's a shout out.
Robocop for me had the perfect ending for that kind of movie. The good character moments, resolving the plot right away, and the music kicks right back in. Just perfect. I think a lot of movies now, they sort of fall in the trap of they do too much in the ending. Like, they keep going where they should have stopped. Terminator, I think, still has a good ending. I just personally could have done without the last scene of Sarah Connor, where it was just her speaking very metaphorically and about things, and it didn't hold much weight, I feel. And then I didn't need to see how the picture got taken. That took me out a little bit, and I think just starting her on that path by having her kill the Terminator was a more proper way to end.
Yeah, I'd agree.
For me.
I actually disagree.
Oh,
I actually like the ending of Terminator more than the ending of Robocop. Like I said, love both these movies, so that's not a diss, because I think both endings are great. But what I like so much about the ending of Terminator is I think it allows the story to breathe. Like with Robocop, the fact that it kind of ends just sort of abruptly. It's like his character arc's finished. He said, I'm Alex Murphy. He's regained his humanity. It's perfect. Works perfectly for this action-packed movie. But I think with Terminator, where it's just tension on tension on tension on tension on tension, right? And then she kills the Terminator. I think it's good that you get somewhat of a release. Having one moment with Sarah Connor to breathe where you see she is pregnant now. Kyle Reese kind of is the father, and you do get that picture. I do think that does kind of...
I just don't think that the scene was necessary to portray that. I think we could have assumed that she was pregnant from what we saw with John Connor.
Me, I feel that works. It's just that's something that's...
It's a little redundant.
I guess this just has to do with taste personally, but
yeah,
that's a good realization on maybe I rewatch or thinking it over later. And personally, I like it. I don't think that was talking down to the audience. I think it was maybe breaking it down for the audience, whereas I like to sit on the thoughts of movies more and come to that realization on my own.
Well, what I like about it so much, there's a scene around maybe the middle or near the end of the second act of the movie where Kyle's talking about that picture of her, and he's basically saying, I always wondered what she was thinking in that moment. I always wonder, like, if she looked kind of, she's like, not
she
like
looked sad,
but like kind of sad, and I kind of wondered what she was thinking. I actually think it's really cool that you literally get to hear what she was thinking. For me, it's somewhat of a cathartic moment, and I also think that last shot of her riding off into these mountains where a storm is coming is such a great visual ending for one of Terminator's themes, which is just this impending doom that you can never escape. So I can understand why you would think it drags, and especially comparing to Robocop, which is like no filler, no, it's like,
I don't think it's the fact that it drags, because I agree with you that it's good to give it time to end.
Yeah.
I think what you've unconvinced me on is how just having it be a literal storm to me doesn't tie in as well.
Yeah, but I think if it as a piece of art, I think that the metaphorical storm still works perfectly fine. So I think it works. But
yeah, I mean it works. Yeah.
but I also understand why you'd like the ending of RoboCop better. I just really like the ending of the Terminator, and I remember it like as a youth being like, oh, that's crazy. Oh, that's crazy. Like, oh, I was like,
Yeah, I guess.
I still think it's really cool. And I think it's done really well.
What I sort of noticed was that Terminator had some edits that I didn't care for towards the beginning. It was cutting very fast, and
Yeah,
it was things like that. And then, sort of in the middle ground of the movie, cutting forward because to flash forward to Kyle Reese's backstory. I felt those segments may have taken a little more time than they needed to. It felt like there were some scenes of just him running could have probably been cut out. There are important parts in that, like I think showing him fighting off the robots was very important. Not a huge criticism of the movie, but I don't think there's scenes like that in RoboCop.
yeah. Well, one thing I can and to kind of add on to that is with Terminator and RoboCop, I both think that they have good action, but I think RoboCop's action is a lot more visceral and a lot more enjoyable and just a lot better in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like Terminator has some really cool moments, like when there's two cars kind of riding side by side and they're just kind of putting shotguns out, and
Yeah.
you have sort of that mixed effect of Kyle Reese's experience, but Sarah Connor is not, and so he's kind of trying
Yeah,
to
those are
teach
cool.
her while he's trying to fight off a Terminator while he's already under equipped.
I went into that movie like thinking about how often movies just build up like a trained killer. What happens is you get into the movie and then for plot reasons they're gonna miss their shots against the main character. Then they shoot like stormtroopers throughout the whole thing. I think Terminator for me actually balanced it pretty well. I could tell why he would miss that shot. There was a lot of things he was shooting through in pretty much all the scenes. It would be like Kyle Reese is always moving.
They're always on defense against the Terminator because they just don't really have a hope of beating him in the first place. That speech where Kyle Reese is talking to Sarah Connor and she's flipping out. He's like, "Look, you don't understand. You can't beat this thing. You can't reason with it. It's literal like only mission in life, or not, it's not alive, but is to kill you, and it won't stop until it does that." And
I like that too. And it was also, at first, I was a little off put by how he was very bad at explaining the situation to her. But first of all, how can you ever explain to somebody that you traveled back in time? It's never going to work. You can never explain that in a realistic way.
well,
Or that someone
yeah.
in the 80s especially will believe it. I think it also fit with Kyle Reese's character where he's a bit of an out of touch soldier, doesn't know how to properly convey things well to people. He doesn't have the best communication skills, and I think that helped in service of his childhood. So I actually think it became a good thing in the movie.
Terminator rightfully shows what would happen if, under a normal circumstance, you tried to explain that to somebody with him talking to that psychiatrist. And he's like, "Yeah, this guy's crazy. He's got one of the best paranoid delusions of all time,
Yeah,
but the guy's crazy."
I like that a lot.
And I think that it's really cool that like Sarah, like it's almost like she doesn't want to believe it. She doesn't want to believe that she's the mother of the future, or so called, or she doesn't want to believe that there's this, oh, it's just a guy. And a lot of times when we're in moments or some where it's not something we like in our life, we almost want to believe the best outcome to kind of just avoid it. And then you see that reality come crashing in when Terminator murders this whole police department.
And I think the police department scene was definitely my favorite action sequence in the movie. Probably
It's very good.
between both movies.
Really?
I can see that.
I really liked it.
Yeah, I would say a comparable scene in RoboCop is him when he's breaks into like the cocaine. Was that what it was?
I forgot about
I
that
don't
scene
know.
actually. That was really
Some
good.
sort of powdered
It was
drug,
it was
we'll say.
it was a cocaine factory.
But yeah, I think that's a comparable action scene, and I don't think it's as good as the Terminator murdering everyone in the police department. There's one thing I feel like we should really talk about, though. Literally RoboCop versus literally Terminator. Like, as a cyborg, who do you like better design-wise?
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, they both work for what they are.
I think they both work really well for what they're meant for. If RoboCop had a Terminator design, it wouldn't work nearly as well, and if Terminator had a RoboCop design, it wouldn't work at all.
I guess in that regard, there's nothing about Terminator that I can really nitpick, it feels like, because they show you a lot of the design, and I like that they're not afraid to show you very intricate details on it. RoboCop, I mean, somehow they never shoot him in the mouth area.
Yeah.
and he doesn't have any protection.
Yeah, that actually kind of bothered me too. I didn't say anything about it, but it was like because it wasn't really at all like it's the same thing with
I
like
just think if we have to
Batman
compare
when he's
them
wearing a
directly,
bulletproof suit,
yeah.
but like yeah.
I just think if we have to compare them directly, then that might be the deal breaker for me. Otherwise, I actually love RoboCop's costume.
I'll just say what I like about both of their suits in more detail. What I like about the Terminator is he literally starts off as only human, and then he
And
ends
then
up.
over time, he goes down to
Yeah.
just the bare skeleton.
Yes, that is just
It's
so
really
cool.
cool.
That is so cool. I think he's a great physical representation of impending doom, which is present throughout the movie, and I think he does that immaculately.
Yeah.
Pretty much flawlessly. Also, just I remember when I first saw Arnold, he looked inhumanly large.
Yeah.
Like he looks big in other things too, but like he looked really, really big. And
Especially compared to everybody else
Yes.
that he goes against, none of them
Like-
hold a candle to him.
like Kyle Reese, like in theory, he's actually not that skinny. He actually is in great shape. But next to the Terminator, he looks like a teeny little stick. So, as a physical presence and the symbolic representation of the impending doom that's coming for them, I think he works perfectly. Last thing I just want to say about like the Terminator is just when he pops out of the fire at the end. I remember as a kid that being like crazy. Like I was like, oh, they
So
defeated
cliche.
him. He blew up in a truck.
So cliche.
Well, not back then.
I guess
yeah,
maybe
it's
it
like
made
if
the
you've
cliche.
never
Yeah, I
seen
guess
it-
if it's made the cliche, it can't be cliche. But
It's
Yeah.
just like it's like they
Well,
basically
that
have
also is better explained than other slashers.
well
Is
and
Terminator the best slasher movie?
yeah,
Make a video about
Terminator's
that.
actually the
it's
best.
Terminator.
slasher.
It kind of is. It's better than any Friday the 13th movie. So
It makes sense why it happens.
better than Halloween.
And yeah, I don't know that I mentioned it yet. That shot of the truck explosion and just the pure visuals and how that movie looks at that point, so beautiful. It's awesome.
Well, and
It's so cool.
I think you mentioned that like some of the cuts look a little jarring at times, but like when it actually like holds on certain shots, there's a lot of shots that just look really cool in the Terminator.
It's true.
I thought it was really cool when they had RoboCop walking through the police department for the first time, being
Well,
I didn't
introduced.
realize until I rewatched that they don't really show him much.
Yeah, so it was like a really cool unveiling almost. Everyone was talking about it in the police department. I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, and the first time he moves, you see like kind of like the side of him through like a CRT TV. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I like that.
face.
It's really cool.
The build up to RoboCop is really, really well done. Like
Mhm.
basically perfect. They both have great aesthetics, but overall, I think Terminator has better aesthetics
and
than RoboCop.
and definitely I think I also agree that I like Terminator's overall aesthetics, but there's one aspect of the aesthetics of RoboCop that I really like. Basically any of like the costume work or special or like effects, not effects, but like makeup, the guy who got thrown into the radioactive waste.
Oh,
They
I'd
went-
forgotten about that part, and I rewatched it, and I was like, "That's horrifying."
No, it was
Oh.
worse than I remembered it being. And I was like, that is really impressive.
And then he gets
Yeah.
bulldozed by a car. Like that guy got it the worst out of everyone.
Oh yeah, by far.
I'm looking at my aesthetic scores, and I don't think I'm meaning to change them. I think what puts RoboCop that gives it the edge for me is that it describes its setting very well all the time when they're at OCP. They do a great job conveying the corporate feel of the building. Very cool visuals showing how tall it is and everything. I think they convey the time period it's set in very well. Looks very Detroit. Really makes you feel like you're in Detroit. No, it's just that
That's a good
it conveys a city that is under siege by crime.
You know,
I think Terminator at times could have done better putting me in the 80s.
I'll say this about Terminator. It doesn't only have the task of putting you in the 80s, it has the task of putting you in the future as well. And I
Yes,
actually think
and putting it in the future, I think, did very well.
I actually think it did really well both times. And I can give a couple of examples. Obviously with the future, like I think it shows you just enough of like the war-torn world with its skulls everywhere.
Yeah, I like that.
And they're riding in these cars that look like they're barely being held together. And then it shows you like the inside of one of their bases, and everything looks
World-
so
Yeah,
ragtime.
the world just decrepit.
It's
and
so
dying.
bleak. And then you have a Terminator that runs in, you see his glowing red eyes at some point. But then when you get to the 80s, I mean, I thought that the diner felt very 80s that she worked in. I felt that like her friend and like her just listening to those like old headphones and stuff and her frizzy hair.
Oh, yeah,
I
and
thought,
all the hairstyles.
yeah, all the hairstyles were great. I thought when she went to that, I forgot what the bar's name was, but I like the lighting in there a lot. I liked all the, like, there's like a lot of strobing colors, and that did a really good job. The fact that the police department was smoking cigarettes the whole time, it did a good job at feeling 80s and also showing the post-apocalyptic future. But at the same time, it's a toss-up round for me because RoboCop also does a great job with like
The big key thing that I like about RoboCop's aesthetics in terms of setting is that it conveys not only the 80s, but an 80s Detroit transformed by crime and OCP's influence. Police Precinct was done very, very well,
it was.
and there's a lot of good details in it, like how the men and women are just changing right in front of each other, which
Yeah.
I don't know what that decision was. Maybe it was
It
just
was
so
it
that
was
they could
cool
have it.
though. Yeah.
But it was also like I liked it because the men weren't focusing on the woman changing too heavily, and
Yeah.
the direction didn't focus on it too much either, which to me that symbolizes that everyone is aware that they have bigger things going on, much more
Yeah.
important things, and it's like, okay, I actually really like details like that that make it a more convincing world, I think.
I agree. I think that RoboCop did that super well. And like to me, like setting is a toss up. I think that like if you're looking at the settings part of aesthetic, yeah, I think that for sure can be a toss up, and I might even lean RoboCop.
Did we talk on recording about special effects?
I don't know if we did. I'll say with the Terminator, they did a good job of not relying on the stop motion effects too much.
That's true.
Like Ed 209, you almost every time you see him, if every time you see him is it's stop motion.
Yeah.
Where the Terminator, when they cut back to those close-ups of him where they using puppetry, I actually think that still holds up and looks really good.
That I do think.
And I think for me, what the tiebreaker is the music. I think the Terminator just has slightly better music. I mean,
Really?
yeah,
I was gonna say that I think the Terminator has very good and fitting music, but I think that music to me was only great at conveying the one tone of tension, whereas I
but it
think
does that so well.
it does it very well. I just think that RoboCop's themes or the music in RoboCop conveys like the heroic aspect of him going in and fighting crime very well, the emotional moments of him remembering his past and being fired on by the SWAT and just trying to regain his own humanity.
Yeah, and
To me, it has just such a wide range that it nailed perfectly.
I can definitely see that. I just feel like there's not much of that range being needed in Terminator. Is probably why.
I think it does a serviceable job when Kyle Reese and Sarah get together and when they just have those emotional moments talking together. And I think there's a different goal when you're trying to go for a more muted tone.
Yeah.
That works. I just think RoboCop then went the extra mile and did very well.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think to give my thoughts on the music, initially I thought it was going to be a wash for like I thought Terminator was going to destroy RoboCop, but then I listened to the soundtracks and I'm like, RoboCop's got a really good theme.
Yeah, it's
Kinda
pretty
hits.
close.
And I was like, that's
And the fact that a movie like when he first goes out at RoboCop and
Yeah.
plays that theme, and then the way it ends is so perfect.
Yeah,
because it starts at just the right
And-
time.
and it's like
Nailed it.
I'll say this about the RoboCop soundtrack is RoboCop conveys heroism and justice so well, is so cinematic, and the way that the music floats and flies and is bombastic is so perfect for the movie. And
Well,
I think
on that, I also think the way Terminator's music just like shows impending doom and nothing you can do to stop it is also really
Yeah, it's
strong
good
and perfect
because-
for the movie.
Yeah, it has that sort of heavy machine type sounds that
Yes.
fits with the Terminator.
and that's what I'm going to say about Terminator, because I also like Terminator's music better overall. It has this very iconic electric sound that so much of these retro futurist like steampunk vibes have gone back to Terminator for influence for like those type of sounds. I think that does a really good job, but also the Terminator's music tells an incredible story. Like just listening to the music alone, you've got those like
Yeah.
and then these like synth like lines through it. and they play that every time the Terminator's on screen. But then you have this little synth interlude that's kind of a beautiful piece between like the da 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 da, and it's like this through line of it's the humans trying to run away from these drums, these dark drums, these like distorted drums, and they play. And I remember the most human moment in the movie is right before Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor conceive a child. It's like one of the only times you hear a piano, and it's that interlude, that theme, no drums, nothing else, just that. And I think the Terminator theme is like one of my favorite movie score themes of all time. That being said, still really like Robocop. Still think it's great. I think it sounds more cinematic in a lot of ways.
I can agree with all of that. All of this is tough because, I mean, for all these categories, it's scoring pretty good. Both of them are scoring.
Mine are only
well.
like 1 point difference or like the same.
Pretty much. It's just I'm having to split hairs here.
Yes.
Like directly.
Well,
and that's why if you're like Robocop, I'm like, you idiot, Kyle.
Yeah.
How dare you choose Robocop's music?
So
I mean, I could see like Robocop or Terminator winning for everything except for like one
we
category.
haven't talked about themes much yet.
That's how I'm moving
So
down to.
I think themes. This one is once again those splitting hairs category.
What puts me on the side of Robocop for this one? Take a shot every time I say that.
Yeah.
But Robocop does a very good job of having a variety of people from different backgrounds react to the plot unfolding.
I
Where
agree.
it has people on the news, and it's like satirized news format, like interviewing people on the street, reacting to the plot unfolding. And I think that was very interesting how it's already setting up the themes of should Robocop, like, is he human? And should he be doing all of these things? And Terminator does perfectly fine with the characters it has reacting to the situation. Thinking about it now and even thinking about it then while watching it, I was more interested in seeing how the situation affected the world as a whole. And I feel like we mostly only got to see how it affected some individual people, the police precinct, and then the main characters.
I guess my response to like the world around, I think that Robocop does that aspect better because it like gives everyone's perspective. I mean, you even gives Dick Jones' perspective. It kind of also leads into the corporate influence in a way. The greed of corporations, where there's a scene where, like we said, Dick Jones kind of gives his perspective on things. He's like, "Look, man, I don't care if the Ed 209s work or not. They were gonna make us a bunch of money."
And there was this one quick scene that I really liked. It was short, but it was Robocop was kind of dazed out while they were making him, and you hear you hear him talking to Bob Morton. Oh, we can save one of his arms, and Bob Morton's like, nah,
Get rid of the arm. Dude.
get rid of the arm, and they're like, well, we can still say. And he's like, no, get rid of it, because in his mind, it's better for marketing. It's better for marketing if it's an all metal cyborg.
And that's kind of, you get that kind of side of the corporate world and just them sort of seeing people in air quotes as property, of them basically being like, Robocop is he's essentially our property. You get to see Dick Jones basically, I'm just going to kill off my competitors. I'm just going to kill off this. I'll work with a known criminal, Clarence Roderick, known rapist and cop murderer. I don't care about him. I own the police. Thinking like the world is their playground, and just kind of just how out of touch they are with everything going on around them. And I think that Robocop did a really good job just showing that side of things. And unfortunately, I don't think it's confined to the Robocop movie exclusively.
Maybe not.
And so
may have been a little too telling.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of corporate greed now.
Very well.
And so I think that was super well done. What do you guys think Robocop has to say about technology?
I actually think it's sort of the perfect, maybe not the perfect, but I really click with its idea on technology, because the idea that things are always getting worse, even as we make progress technologically. Some of this technology can revive people. Sometimes we can bring people back from the dead. On the other hand, Robocop isn't exactly the ideal way of doing that. He's sort of still seen as the Frankenstein's monster to some people, and how he's sort of the one good new piece of technology that works mostly. You have Ed 209 who completely doesn't work, and it's just like a total it's nothing more than a weapon. It can't do anything
Well, just
other
real,
than that.
well, just real briefly to interject too, with you saying even though technology advances, doesn't mean that things get better for the people as much. It's like they basically revived RoboCop, and as the fob said, he basically, oh, we can revive his arm. Like, how much else could have they revived from him? And he's like, nah, get rid of that. We don't need that.
Those are the important details where things start to get lost when you try to introduce new technology to better humanity.
Yeah.
And isn't it so funny still like saying the name RoboCop, and we have to talk about how he's a good metaphor for what's actually happening in our world, but it's true. It's just that he's a very good symbol for how you need to balance the new technology that's coming one way or the other and trying to retain your humanity. I think that's the key part of the movie, is that staying in touch with your humanity is the most important thing to do in regards to the evolution of technology.
And yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think it's a really good parallel to like basically every good technological advancement has its equal share of bad. Like social media can be used for good, it can also be used for bad. AI can be used for good, can be used for bad.
It's a big key thing. A lot of people are I mean, there's some fear mongering about AI. Not unworthy. Terminator isn't a completely unrealistic circumstance to happen. AI will be developed. There will always be people who want to develop AI. And I think the take that I've seen some people have that I really like is that you just need to adjust to the world and try to use it the right way.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, while we're on AI, I guess, because I wouldn't say RoboCop has any real meat-worthy discussion on AI itself. It's more on just the effects of technology in general. Terminator has very specific commentary on AI and the potential effects of AI, and just basically being a cautionary tale of AI. And it's like,
I can agree with that. I just think you're gonna go with themes of the Terminator. I would actually begin to think symbolically that Terminator is not really about AI necessarily. Like, AI didn't need to be the villain. Like, the villain could just be something else. And because honestly, I think it would be a criticism to start to say that it takes on the theme of AI very well, because I don't think it necessarily does it perfect. But it does work very well as a cautionary tale.
I would say that AI has more of a thematic resonance in Terminator 2, but obviously we're not talking about Terminator 2. I think as in the first one, although it might not have this deep symbolic weight like you're basically saying, I think it being a cautionary tale of the dangers will always keep it very relevant in popular discussion as something that could go seriously wrong, and people just didn't think that it would as much, and it was too late once it got out of hand. That is super relevant right now. That's something that Elon Musk has been talking about like everywhere pretty much. This could be the end game if we're not careful. I think that the threat of nuclear war is also something that is like being on the brink of nuclear war, wiping out humanity.
I can agree with that. And then I think for me, what Terminator needs to really round that out is the idea of AI to have been starting in the 80s and people reacting to it. I think to do that theme exactly right, it needed to have people be complacent when AI is growing. And it doesn't show that at all. It only tells you.
I still think it is effective without doing that. Like, yeah, that would have been great. And like I said, Terminator 2 does more of that. But I think that it works okay because it's showing you that before and after, showing the contrast between the carelessness of like the 80s and the like simple like, oh, my date canceled on me, that's so sad, you know. And then it's like, and then showing,
I didn't think about that.
And then showing the we're trying to survive, and this out of touch Kyle Reese, just our problems seem comparably minor compared to the problems of the future,
maybe slightly.
And I think that's something that is a really interesting idea, how it's like they're basically struggling for food, they're struggling for water, they're struggling to just survive the onslaught of attacking robots. And you could make that in case, like, if you wanted to compare it to, like, I don't know, wars in the Middle East right now, you know, which is a hot topic, like just how my problems personally seem relatively minor to the people that are struggling over there. And because Kyle's right when he says like themes of AI specifically aren't as impactful as much when it just focuses on AI as a symbolic force. It's more of a physical presence in the movie. But I think the themes that come from that are still relevant and they're still impactful.
I do think you hit the nail on the head with how our problems seem so small compared to other people, even now on different parts of the world, but especially what the problems could be in the future.
As you said, I think it nails that. I think the human condition is, I think, another interesting thing that Terminator tackles, in the sense that now someone like Sarah Connor, who is this unassuming normal person, when she's faced with the problems of the future, can be hardened, even with all the nukes going off, even with all the hardships. It's like humans find a way to just hold on a little bit longer, even when they're in these dire circumstances. And I think that itself is interesting. I think that the idea that love can sort of live on, even with things being so dire, and there's still always a place for that. I think Terminator does that really well. I just think Terminator thematically has got a ton of substance, as does Robocop, though. So to me, I think Terminator's a little bit more impactful for me personally, based off of just all of the themes that I've brought to light. Let's get to scoring. We'll start with the Fob, then we'll go to Kyle, and we'll go to me.
All right. So let's start with the story. Robocop's on a story of 10, and we got Terminator on a story of 7. I just wasn't a huge fan of how the time travel played out. And then next is characters, I believe. Robocop's a 9, Terminator's a 9. Both of these scores were changed from the opinions from outsiders. The Sarah Connor Reese hype got to me a bit, because the Lewis degrading kind of got to me too. Aesthetics, I had Robocop on 9 and Terminator on 10. Both really good. I just think Terminator had a slight edge. And then for themes, Robocop on 10, Terminator on 9. Yeah, I think the themes were done better in Robocop. Terminator might be an 8, but we'll give it a 9 for now. And then action, Robocop's 10 and Terminator's a 9. Pretty self-explanatory. And then total for Robocop was 48, and the total for Terminator is 44.
So, my final tallies for story, I have Robocop at a 10. I think it was perfect, and I wouldn't change anything. Terminator, I have it at a 9. For much reasons I already stated, already still one of the best 80s stories. Characters, I have both at a 9. I think both actually, now after our discussion, convinced me were much better than I thought. Aesthetics, I have both at a 9. Robocop would have gotten the edge, I think. Again, I just wanted to see like more OCP aesthetic influence. Themes, Robocop is at a 10 and Terminator is at a 9. Very, very close though. And action, I have both at an 8. So my final tallies, Robocop is at 46 and Terminator is at 44.
I think mine's the highest overall for both, actually. I gave the story for Robocop a 9 because it's super good. Just a couple little things that bothered me, but overall, perfect. Terminator, I gave a 10 because the story just works for me on almost every level. Characters, I gave Robocop a 9. Peter Weller gave a spectacular performance. Terminator, I gave a 10 only because I don't
Terminator's a great
dislike anyone, and I think Sarah Connor is great. I think Kyle Reese is great, and as a presence, I think the Terminator works great as well. I also really like the aesthetics in both of these movies. I gave Robocop a 10. Terminator also gave a 10 though, because I think the aesthetics are perfect in that movie as well. Action, I gave Robocop a 10 because it is pure 80s awesomeness. I gave Terminator a 9. Lastly, for themes, I gave Robocop a 9. Just because, screw it, actually. I have no problems with Robocop themes. They're getting...
He had nothing.
I was thinking about, why did I give it a 9? Nothing. It's actually a 10. Robocop gets a 10, baby, on themes.
You get to get to work on time.
And Terminator gets a 10 on themes because they're both...
That's what we saw.
Yeah.
They are both spectacular commentaries, which means, I don't have to pull out the calculator for this one. Robocop gets up to 1 point, meaning that Robocop gets 48, and then Terminator gets a 49. Our final total numbers
You good?
is Terminator at an average of 45.6 and Robocop at an average of 47.3, with the raw numbers being 137 for Terminator and 142 for Robocop. So, our big winner today, Robocop!
Yay!
The ultimate victor.
We won this film fight.
And once again, I take all of the L's.
You got Spider-Man 3 to number 2. But it's not complaining.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Film Fights or Classic Clash. Which of these movies do you like better, Robocop or Terminator? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.